Let me talk about at this point another matter about which there is near universal consensus or agreement in our culture and society and among medical ethicists. And that is that a decision to forego life sustaining treatment, a decision to let go, to use the language that Gowande used, uh, a decision for oneself or for others to let go and to forego life sustaining treatment is sometimes morally permissible and possibly even sometimes obligatory, something we really ought to do, not just that we're permitted to do. Lying behind the idea that letting go is sometimes morally appropriate, that it's sometimes morally appropriate to refuse or not provide a potentially life sustaining treatment, is the recognition that death is inevitable. Death is a part of life. None of us will escape it. And while it is not to be sought, neither is it to be feared. Maybe this judgment reflects something of the attitude and perspective of that John Donne sonnet that was so significant in the film Wit. Donne wrote, "Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so." Death, according to Donne, isn't mighty or dreadful. It's just part of life. Another significant recognition behind the idea that letting go may be morally appropriate is that biological life, simply being alive, is not an absolute good in and of itself. While it's generally good to be alive rather than dead, there are other relevant values to consider. Specifically, all those things that make life worth living. Remember the TED Talk by Rita Sharon that we watched? She talked about how our awareness of death and its inevitability enables us to identify those things that really matter to us, those things that might endure, the accomplishments we have made in life, the lives we have touched through our work, the art we have created, the friendships we have forged, the love we have given and received. These are the things that have made and make our lives worth living. Simply being alive, or staying alive as long as possible, is of no value apart from these. Another important reality behind the idea that letting go is sometimes the right thing to do is that life-sustaining treatments are often quite burdensome. Not only do age and illness or injury undermine our lives and our vital capacities for forging lives of meaning and value, so do some of the medical treatments we seek in response to age or illness and injury. We've talked about and you've seen displayed the horrible side effects of chemotherapy. Think about the ways in which pain medication dulls the senses and with them a patient's awareness and their capacity for engaging the world and those around them. Think about how a respirator interferes with one's ability to speak, to communicate with others, to eat, to be fed by others. Finally, think about this. What many will note as morally relevant is the reality that when a life-sustaining treatment is refused or withheld or withdrawn, it is the patient's disease or injury that is the actual cause of their death. Though it may seem to us or feel to us as if we have killed a loved one when we agree to take them off a respirator, for example, that is actually not the case at all. It's their underlying medical condition that is killing them. Surely we foresee that the withdrawal of the respirator or the refusal of the chemotherapy or the do not resuscitate order may mean that the person dies more quickly as a result of the decision. That is not our intention. We don't make such decisions because we seek death for ourselves or another, but in recognition that death is a part of life, that other values matter too, and most of all, to spare ourselves or another the burdens associated with a life-sustaining treatment. Recall that Sarah Monopoly's oncologist told her that 85% of patients responded well to the chemo he proposed. What about those other 15%? They were actually made worse off. And recall Gawande's claim that in many situations, patients have actually lived longer than expected without what was thought to have been a life-sustaining treatment. The point is this. when we agree to the removal or withdrawal of a life-sustaining treatment. Death is not our aim or our purpose. Here are some of the things that are typically thought to be relevant to such a decision and relevant to the idea that foregoing or refusing life-sustaining treatment is sometimes permissible. Many would say, look, it's more likely to be permissible if the patient has a terminal illness. Obviously, if the patient has an illness that can be cured or an injury that can be fully healed, it's probably not right or good to forego a life-sustaining treatment. Let's say to refuse to put them on a respirator. Secondly, if the patient is dying, not only do they have a terminal illness, but they have already begun the process of dying. They are headed towards their demise. Again, even with a terminal illness, maybe they have the illness that's going to kill them, but we know they're going to live 5, 6, 7 years. They are not yet dying from that illness. Once we move into the situation where they are dying of that illness, it seems to be more permissible to refuse life-sustaining treatment. Obviously, the closer we get to death. So we're in a situation where the patient is going to die within hours, no matter what we do. Certainly in that sort of a context, it would seem to be morally permissible, even obligatory, to do nothing to interfere with that thing we can't prevent, or that nothing to interfere to extend a life we can't really extend that far, no matter what. Pain and suffering are thought to be relevant. Clearly, if a patient is suffering from an illness, but we are able, through various means, including medical ones, to relieve their pain and suffering, there is not much of a moral impulse to let go as there is in a situation where a person is suffering miserably, and there's nothing we can do seemingly to mitigate or relieve that pain and suffering. Some think quality of life considerations are profoundly important. What if the person's illness or injury and age has gotten them to a point where all those things that have made their life meaningful and enjoyable and valuable to them are no longer possible for them. They no longer have the capacities that made those things possible. They're no longer capable, some use this criteria, to give and receive love from friends and family. Plus they are suffering. Then quality of life has become so low that some would say extending life is no longer even a benefit. And this leads to the final consideration, and some would say this is the only consideration, or this is the way to sort of incorporate all of our wisdom and bring it to bear on such decisions. When the burdens of the treatment seem to outweigh the benefits, then we are under no obligation to maintain life-sustaining treatment. Let's think a little bit about what the benefits and burdens are that we need to balance here, the benefits and burdens of a particular treatment. Obviously, the greatest benefit that any medical intervention can have is that it reverses the disease process. It heals us or cures us. Clearly, because we value life, that sort of a that's the best possible benefit that a medical treatment can have. Now, the mere extension of life can also be a great benefit. Maybe a treatment can heal us, maybe a treatment can't cure us, but it can extend our lives. And because our lives still have quality to us, despite the illness or the injury, extending our life is a great benefit. Sometimes medical treatments neither reverse the disease or extend our lives, but it alleviates suffering. That's called a palliative treatment. a medicine that takes away our pain and relieves our anxiety or our suffering, it provides a benefit to us. Now, what are the burdens that must be considered alongside the benefits? As we've seen, many treatments are harmful to the patient's physical condition, those side effects we've talked about. We don't give people chemotherapy because we want to give them rashes and make them fatigued or nauseous, but those do happen and they are burdensome. And with those side effects often comes pain and or suffering that is to say, it's often medical care itself that adds to the pain and suffering of the patient. And that's relevant in deciding whether or not that particular treatment is morally required of us, or whether it's permitted for us to refuse it or forego it for someone else. Treatments can also be emotionally and not just physically burdensome because they interfere with human functioning. People often talk about how difficult it is to visit someone in an ICU because maybe they have tubes of various sorts that make it impossible for us to touch them or to communicate with them or to love them and show our human affection in normal ways that we do. And those cause the patient additional emotional harm and not just physical harm. And then finally, believe it or not, there's broad agreement that the financial cost of a healthcare treatment to the patient and his or her family is morally relevant. I would say even Roman Catholic moral teaching, which is generally, puts a high regard simply to biological life, and generally resists the idea that a life can be of so low quality that its extension is not a benefit. But interestingly enough, Roman Catholic moral teaching insists that the costs, financial costs, to the patient and the family are relevant. That is to say, one might refuse a treatment in part because its cost, financial cost, is too great to bear. So the point here is, when we're making decisions about whether or not it's appropriate to forego or refuse a life-sustaining treatment, the balancing of these benefits and burdens may be the most important part of our moral decision making.